And welcome to the St. Johnsbury Chrysler Dodge Jeep Rams Outdoor Edge on WYKR, serving Northeast Vermont and Northwest New Hampshire. I'm Josh Smith, and we've got a good mix of history and spring tradition lined up for you today. Gary Moore sits down with Robert W. Averill, longtime Moosilauke historian and author, for a conversation about the rich history of Mount Moosilauke, from its early days to the stories that still shape it today. And if you spent any time hiking or exploring up that way, you'll definitely enjoy this one. We also bring you our sugaring report, and this time we're on location earlier at Oliver's Sugarhouse in West Groton, where we caught up with Troy Oliver to see how the maple season is shaping up right now. And before we wrap it up at the end of the hour, we will check in with Mark Breen from the Fairbanks Museum for the Outdoor Edge forecast. It's chock-a-block full today, so sit back, get your drink, and get ready for the show.
Good evening. Welcome to Thoughts on Out of Doors. My guest tonight is Robert Averill, who, with Chris Pastoriza, has written 12 books about Mount Moosilauke and the area around Mount Moosilauke, full of history and a lot of good educational things from which I learned a great deal. Robert, let's start with you. Where do you live, and how did you get involved in this project?
Well, good afternoon. I've been involved with Moosilauke for a very long time. I first turned up over there when I was a camper back in 1964, when I was about 14. And ever since, I've been more and more interested in the history of the area. A lot of the interest came when I went to attend Dartmouth College in the 60s and early 70s. And while there, I did a lot of work on the mountain itself.
Sure.
And then later, I got more interested in trying to find out about the older history of the mountain, which was back into the 19th century.
Yeah, definitely. I've read all your books, so I know that you have a real affinity for Moosilauke in the area. You said you first visited there when you were a camper in the area?
I was a camper at a camp in Maine called Camp Winona, which was one of the early camps going back to about 1904. And these camps were interested in doing trips to the White Mountains. And Moosilauke is the farthest west of all the White Mountains. But It's quite an interesting peak, and we made a trip there. And I remember going up the Beaver Brook Trail, but I don't actually remember anything else.
Well, and then, of course, when you went to Dartmouth, you got actively involved in the Dartmouth Outing Club and so forth.
Yeah, I did. At that point, it was more getting interested in the trails and the facilities on the mountain. But as I gradually met older Dartmouth alumni, including people like Sherman Adams, who was a class of 1920,
right,
and other ancient people to a student, it became evident that there was a lot of interesting material, including these stories that these people would tell among themselves, some of which might have even been true.
Well, also, tell me a little bit about Chris, how you got involved with her. I know she's had a lot to do with the research for these books.
Chris communicated with me, back about 5-6 years ago, and initially she was interested in the fact that I had been collecting stereo view photographs related to one of the people involved on Moosilauke, a man named Amos Clough, who came from Warren. And we gradually increased our connections. It was almost by virtue of email. It was a bit like having a pen pal. But it was obvious to me that she was a very good organizer. So inevitably, she's kind of come in as co-editor. In other words, she helps me out getting everything straight. And she's an excellent proofreader, which is something else that takes a real knack to do right.
Now, she lives, what, Easton?
She lives in Easton, which, as it happens, is just a few miles from the site of one of the CCC camps at Wildwood.
Sure.
In fact, Wildwood was one of the very first CCC camps in the state of New Hampshire and maybe in New England as well. And but she knew a lot about that, and that happened to gradually become more and more interesting to me. So we finally ended up putting out a separate book on the CCC in New Hampshire.
Right. And I plan on talking about that a little bit later.
Yes.
Because that's one of my more recent ones, and I've certainly greatly enjoyed that. In fact, it was, what, 2024 when you published that?
That's right. We had initially had it kind of put in with the other Moosilauke book we were doing, but as it expanded in size, we decided to make it its own book, and that worked out very well.
Sure.
That's the core of Granite book.
Right. You don't live up here. You live down in Western Massachusetts. Is that correct?
Well, I having had to earn a living, I'm originally from Western Mass, and I live currently in Shelburne Falls, out in the woods. And it's not too dissimilar from the area around Moosilauke, not quite as wild. And but I've managed to stay active in the North Country, either by virtue of doing things with the Outing Club, or more particularly, as I worked until retired in 2015, I also would go up and provide services in my medical field up in North Conway and in Berlin, New Hampshire, which meant that I got to drive up north every few weeks.
Sure.
And make a long drive, but it worked out well.
Living in Shelburne Falls is not exactly a bad thing. It's a pretty nice little town. I've written about the Bridge of Flowers before and routinely encourage people during the warm months to go down and visit the Bridge of Flowers. It's such a spectacular display.
Yeah. Well, Warren has its missile, and Shelburne Falls has the Bridge of Flowers.
Yes. 12 books. Started off in 1998 with A Mix of Years, on up to the Moosilauke Reader, Up Moosilauke, In Search of Amos Clough. You mentioned him a few minutes ago. Daniel Clement's Moosilauke Journal, Mount Moosilauke Tip Talk News, Moosilauke Reader, a couple of those, 3 of those, I guess, Cora Granite and so forth. And then most recently you published a guide to all those books, just came out, the Moosilauke History Series, which certainly helps anyone who's trying to start out reading these books to do a little research and figure where they want to start. At least from what I can determine, having read them all, they all share Moosilauke in the region, but each one can be read separately as a standalone book. Is that correct? Is that your take on it?
I think that's a very good way to approach it. I didn't do the books in any specific fashion in terms of picking a book that started at the beginning of the story. I basically worked with what material I could find, and getting the material together from different sources around the state and from other places, it became clear that it would make sense to just do each book and not worry about how they were going to fit together. So although the books that I've got in my checklist are basically listed in chronological order of their being done, they really can be read at different points. They don't have to be read in any specific order. As I worked with the books, it became clear that certain subjects really required extra attention, and that's where it's been great to have Chris's help on putting these together. Specifically, the last 3 books in the Moosilauke series have a great deal of material in them from many, many sources.
Yeah, well, let's sort of slide through these more or less in order of which they were published.
Right.
A Mix of Years. That was the first book. It just as I read each of these books, it brought back so many memories. As you know, I grew up in Bradford on a hill farm up off Fairground Road, looking at Mount Moosilauke every morning, every day. Moosilauke's also the mountain that I've climbed more than any others. But in all your books, and certainly here in the very first one, that you quote many individuals that I knew well, as many listeners do. Jerry Danielle, longtime professor at Dartmouth, who well known for talking about the history of northern New England and doing presentations all over. And of course, you also are talking with Will Lang, well known for New Hampshire Public Television, Windows to the Wild, an old friend. And, there's a lot of that in there. They're names that people who come from this area will know well, and certainly would be interested in hearing what they had to say.
Another person I should mention right off, and who was involved with many parts of the series, was Catherine Blaisdell.
Oh, yes.
Who, did her many books on the area's history, as Over the River and Through the Woods, as I recall, and or something like that.
No, that's it. Uh-huh.
And I met her a number of times, but even with the first book by Bill Morse, which we put together, had a lot of stuff about lumberjacking and blacksmithing, things like that. And her husband particularly was quite a knowledgeable guy, and we included a good bit of material along with Bill Morse's material as we put things together. And of course, she also had done stories about the gold findings around the mountain up in north of Moosilauke, and the Pike quarry,
right,
for the Pike whetstones. Again, I luckily had worked with her for a while, and she said, well, if you need to use some of my material, go right ahead. So I did.
Yeah.
So we worked in, I found that it became useful to use people who really knew things in a lot more detail than I did. And Bill Morse was quite a discovery, and he was born in 1904, but he was a guy who, you meet people once in a great while who have a kind of a photographic memory, and they'll remember something about somebody 50 or 60 years ago in detail. And they also have the advantage of being pretty much the only one around from that time, so you can't contradict them.
Right.
But Bill was also a really good writer. He wrote most of the material. I didn't do much more than edit anything that I did with Bill, but and also I provided illustrations, which I've added a lot to the material.
Sure. Robert, I think this is a good place for us to pause for a break. I'll get right back.
It's the St. Johnsbury Chrysler Dodge Jeep Rams Outdoor Edge on YKR Country.
At R&L Archery, we know it's not just about the thrill of the hunt or the size of the fish. It's about the moments that matter most, the traditions passed down from one generation to the next, and the stories told by the fire long after the sun is set. It's about the journey, the memories, and the time spent together with friends and family, because these are the moments that truly last a lifetime. R&L Archery, where every adventure begins. Come create your story.
We live somewhere incredible, and all of us at the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department want you to make the most of it. Hiking, hunting, birding, fishing, or even just sitting by a stream for a few minutes after work. Vermont's woods and waters make it possible, and protecting them is our responsibility. So we hope you'll lace up your boots and hike an old woods road on one of our wildlife management areas, or put in for a day at the lake at one of our access areas. We protect these places for their own sake, for the wildlife who call them home, and for you.
This is Sonia from Bachelor Carpentry. March into spring with Bachelor Carpentry. Now is the time to plan your spring projects. whether it's a new deck for summer barbecues or a sunroom to enjoy the early spring blooms. We specialize in turning your plans into reality with precision and care. Head to vtcarpenter.com today to start your journey towards a beautiful home this spring.
The Autosaver Group's St. Johnsbury Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram asks, do your outdoor adventures take you to where you wish you had a four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive? At St. Johnsbury Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram, explore their vast inventory of adventure-savvy four-wheel drives and all-wheel drive vehicles, ready for you to drive at home. Plus, every St. Johnsbury Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram deal includes the Big Deal Plus, which is a 2-year unlimited scheduled maintenance plan, which includes free state inspections for life. Stop in today in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, or shop St. Johnsbury Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram online at stjohnsburycdjr.com.
You've picked the paint colors, maybe even sketched a layout on the back of an envelope, or made the playlist for your grand opening. But without a design, it's just a dream. Riverside Design Works in Bradford makes those dreams real for families and small businesses across the Upper Valley. Affordable, functional, and community-focused, we build for your needs and within your budget. But heads up, the 2026 construction season is booking fast. If you want shovels in the ground next year, you need plans today. Keep it simple. Riverside Design Works. Smart choices, reliable results.
Good evening. Welcome back to Thoughts on the Outdoors. My guest tonight is Robert Averill, who is the author of the 12 books about Mount Moosilauke and the region. His co-author on some of them is Chris Pastoriza, who lives over in Easton. We've been talking about how this series came about, and started off with the very first book in the series, but there's no way tonight we can talk about each of the books individually, but he has the Moosilauke Readers. There were a couple of those. I think there was volume 2 and volume 3 of the books. Stories by locals. I mean, you've been talking about the Blaisdells, Catherine Blaisdell's series of books, which are very popular in this valley here and the surrounding towns. And you also mentioned her husband, Ed, who was a well-known veterinarian. He, too, as you mentioned, was a wealth of knowledge. He was also a collector of antique tools, and he really, as you said, knew a tremendous amount about the area and the people and so forth. And I think that's what made your book so interesting to me. You relied on people like the Blaisdells to help and to provide information. And one name that I knew well back from my Dartmouth days was Jack Noon, who keeps popping up in your books. You want to talk about Jack a little bit?
Sure. Jack Noon is a class of Dartmouth 68, so he actually was just before my time. But as a undergrad at Dartmouth, he was always kind of around, and he had the great good fortune of being assigned to work with Al Merrill, who was the Dartmouth ski coach,
right,
who actually got more active with helping out in managing the Ravine Lodge at Moosilauke, and at a time when it needed a lot of repairs and things like this. And Jack worked for Al for about 10 years, both at Moosilauke and also at the Dartmouth College Grant,
right,
which was also under Al. And Jack is a writer, and he writes history of the area of the North Country, and he writes a lot of what's called historical fiction. In other words, he takes history and then puts his own characters into it, and he has several towns that he has developed that are over near Bradford, which you won't find on any maps.
Right.
And his other interest is to do histories of the history of fishing in New Hampshire and the North Country. He's done multiple books on that. So he really was the guy who inspired me to at least try my hand at putting books together. And although I'm not a writer, I found I could put things together in terms of illustrations along with the text material so that a book would be pretty readable. anybody who's read things from the 19th century usually is impressed with, number one, the print is very small. And this did not help the ability to read the material. They also, of course, wrote in a much more flowery way with a lot of allusions to things. And my goal in terms of stretching the history of Moosilauke and the area back to the 19th century was to both get the material transcribed into a font that would be readable, but also to find illustrations that would go with the text. So unlike the original material, the books that I have are all illustrated fairly well. And it's amazing how many photographs and illustrations can be found if you look hard enough. And it was just a question of kind of figuring out where to place them within the text.
Sure.
So I think that's helped a great deal in some of the older material.
Well, I brought up Jack Noon because so many from this area knew Jack. For many of those years you talked about, he managed the Ravine Lodge for Dartmouth College, a place that anyone who spends much time hiking Moosilauke ends up one way or another. It's also well known for serving meals in the evening to visitors to the area. And Jack was a wealth of knowledge. Another person you mentioned, in addition to Al Merrill with the Dartmouth Outing Club, was Earl Jetty. During my graduate years in the mid-'70s when I was in grad school at Dartmouth, he was in charge of all the facilities. And again, you used him because he is such a wealth of knowledge. And I think that's what's important with all your books. You were able to get to some of these people, many of whom are now deceased. Earl and Jack are not, but you were able to get information from them, first-hand information about this mountain that we love so much.
Another place which really provided a great deal of material, I was pretty much not worried about where things came from. If I could find material someplace, I would go for it. The Historical Society in Concord, the Dartmouth libraries had a great deal of material, and the local historical societies, Warren, Lincoln, others around the mountain had their own collection of material. And of course, what's interesting is that the start of the Moosilauke enterprise back in 1860, when they built the original Summit House, was a Warren project. There was no outing club or Dartmouth involvement at that point. Everything kind of came out of the local people who built the carriage road up Moosilauke,
right,
and built the Summit House and then modified it several times. Eventually it passed on to Dartmouth in 1920, but that's a long time after the initial involvement. Right. But there were people like Zeke Moody, who helped build the chimney. His son Lyle, who many people know, was very active with the Historical Society and showed me all sorts of interesting things on the cemetery stones up in Warren. And most of the old characters who I find I can put into the books are buried in Warren, which is kind of nice. You can go talk to them if you wish. and including Amos Clough, who was the photographer from Warren, who he didn't live very long. He died at age 39, but he was able to do 2 winter expeditions on Moosilauke and later on the top of Mount Washington. And he produced stereographic photographs, which are the photographs that are placed side by side. They're double photographs. And then when you look at them with a viewer, they show up in 3 dimensions.
Right. Yeah.
And it takes a little practice, but I've included a great number of these stereographic photographs in my books because I thought it'd be interesting for people who nowadays don't do that sort of stuff to kind of learn about it and to be able to do it again. Right. But seeing something in 3D is quite different. And
it is.
It makes a great deal of difference for material.
Each of your books is very, very well illustrated with old photos, copies of old maps, as well as these stereoscopic views. you're able to depict so we can see things that are long gone. For instance, you mentioned the Tip Top House or the Summit House, depending on the time period, what it was called. Now, those of us that hike Moosilauke, all we see is basically the corners of where it stood. But it was once a major attraction throughout the warm months. I've got pictures of my parents in about 1945, 46, up there by the Tip Top House in the remains. And, from people from this area, if they weren't alive when it was finally burned, my understanding is it probably was lightning. It hit it at night, and they didn't know. People didn't know it was gone until later in daylight. But it was a place that people went. They hiked up, whether they went up the carriage road or any of the many trails from all four corners. And so seeing a lot of pictures of that, I think local people like me are very happy to see those.
Yep. And I actually made quite an effort. I was up there probably 30 years after the place burned, so my ability to see what was left was limited to things like rocks and other debris. When the place burned, it burned at the beginning of World War II, and they didn't do any cleanup work probably till the late 40s. And what cleanup work involved was taking all the metal stuff like the old bunk bed frames and things like that, and carting them off to the scrub, and making a pile off in the woods there. But I managed to look around and find things that I thought were interesting. And some of the rocks that were carved, many of the people spent time when they went up to the top of Moosilauke. They stayed at the summit houses, but they went out and they got the chisel from the probably the hut master, and they chiseled their name or initials into the rocks.
Oh yeah, and they're still visible today.
They are, if you look. And I spent a good bit of time in the 90s looking at old rocks and seeing what I could find. And it was surprising how much was up there that no one had ever really noticed.
Right.
And I said, well, they'll probably still be there for a while. But even the rocks have a way of wearing away after a few centuries.
Well, I think that's a good place for us to pause again.
We live somewhere incredible, and all of us at the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department want you to make the most of it. Hiking, hunting, birding, fishing, or even just sitting by a stream for a few minutes after work. Vermont's woods and waters make it possible, and protecting them is our responsibility. So we hope you'll lace up your boots and hike an old woods road on one of our wildlife management areas, or put in for a day at the lake at one of our access areas. We protect these places for their own sake, for the wildlife who call them home, and for you.
The Autosaver Group's St. Johnsbury Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram asks, do your outdoor adventures take you to where you wish you had a four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive? At St. Johnsbury Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram, explore their vast inventory of adventure-savvy four-wheel drives and all-wheel drive vehicles, ready for you to drive at home. Plus, every St. Johnsbury Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram deal includes the Big Deal Plus, which is a 2-year unlimited scheduled maintenance plan, which includes free state inspections for life. Stop in today in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, or shop St. Johnsbury Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram online at stjohnsburycdjr.com.
Miles Supply, your stop for all your general business products, paper towels, toilet paper, first aid kits, and more. Purchase your paper and soap products from Miles, and they'll install the dispensers for free. Do you own a salon, restaurant, coffee shop, or gym making a monthly run to the big box store for your business supplies? Save time with Miles Supply. Call today for a sales visit, 476-3963, or walk directly into their showroom, 143 Boynton Street next to Spalding High School. Miles Supply, family owned and building relationships since 1954.
Welcome back to Thoughts on the Outdoors. With me tonight is Robert Averill, the author and co-author of 12 books about Mount Moosilauke and the area around Mount Moosilauke, full of wonderful historical documents, photos, even stereoscopic views, but also information he gathered from many local people, many of whom are now deceased, but he was able to interview them before they those memories were lost. So with that, we'll go back to Mount Moosilauke a little bit here. We've been talking about the Tip Top House, or the Summit House, but Ravine Lodge, a mecca for many of us. The old lodge, they finally decided it couldn't be repaired. And so not that long ago, a new one was built. It's very spectacular. I encourage listeners to go and visit it come summer. And it's a good place, actually, to also have a meal. It's run by Dartmouth College, Dartmouth Hunting Club. But anyways, a couple of the names that you mentioned, Robert, that in your books. One of them's Putt Blodgett, a native of Bradford, just down the road, a farmer, a Dartmouth grad who was very, very active in Dartmouth Outing Club and Mount Moosilauke. You want to mention Putt?
Putt was a whirlwind when I was at Dartmouth, and afterwards he was involved with every aspect of things on Moosilauke, including the trails and work around the lodge itself. And when the lodge started to show its age, it had been built in the late 30s to go with the new skiing ventures of the Outing Club kids. They and with Ross McKenney and a local crew from Warren as the main instigators of the work. But Putt was involved with getting the wood, and I think he provided a lot of the wood necessary to do a complete redo of the Ravine Lodge.
He did provide quite a bit of it. And
he did, and he also provided a lot of advice about it. And the interesting thing is that people who knew the old lodge kind of think, well, we like the old one better. But I think that's not an uncommon thing. The new lodge is made to hold up for another century, hopefully. But it was quite, with all the requirements for building codes and fire and handicapped access, there were a lot of things that had to be changed. But the main thing was that the wood had run its course, and there was enough rot, and that would affect the stability.
This new one is really spectacular. I was one that hated to see the old one go for all sorts of reasons. But the new one is just spectacular. The architecture, the way stuff is put together inside, the structural. That was, by the way, put together very close to here in Newbury. John Nininger and the Wooden House Company. That was all done in his log yard. Actually, very, very close to where we are right now. Probably a quarter mile away in his log yard by the Wells River exit. And then trucked over there.
Which is a nice local connection because, there's a lot of, and I think a lot of the new furniture that was necessary was also produced in Vermont.
Yeah. It's just amazing. I mean, in the center of the lodge, the stairs that go right up through by the massive fireplace to the second. It just the way the wood was used, and you see full trees inside the building acting as support. It's not a typical post and beam.
No.
Anyways, and of course, Eric Saylor was another Dartmouth grad, retired OBGYN from Dartmouth Hitchcock, who's been very involved in that project as well. Unfortunately, Putt is no longer with us. He died almost 2 years ago. Eric is still here. Eric's down in anyways. But I'm running out of time, so I definitely wanted to talk about the CCC camps that were so important all over Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. But there were three of them that you talk about a lot in your books, especially in the book, the more recent book, Core of Granite. Let's start with the one in Wildwood, which, just so everybody understands, Wildwood, as you head up from Swiftwater, if you were going over to Woodstock, you head up between Swiftwater and Lost River is where Wildwood was. Robert?
Right now, there's not much that you would see up there unless you knew where to look.
Well, there's a historic marker at least.
There's a marker.
Yep.
That's true. There is a nice highway marker which is in the area, the other thing you could find at the turnoff to where the Wildwood CCC camp was located, if you drive up the road a bit, you'll see the stone posts that are on either side of the road, and in those there were a little kind of a stone plaque with a date on it. Right. And these are about all you'll find up there as far as physical remnants. There is the Wildwood campground,
right.
And down there's a small pavilion made of logs, basically an outside shelter, and that apparently is a structure that was built by the CCC. So that's had pretty good survival for that length of time.
What are the years the camp was in operation approximately?
Wildwood was one of the very, very first CCC camps organized. Franklin Roosevelt got into office in 1933, and within a month or so, he was already setting up the CCC camps. And Wildwood was probably the first in New England to be set up. And they were able to do this by taking advantage of the military reserve people who were basically on staff for the government, and they assigned them to set up these camps across the country.
Right.
And it took a while to work out how to do this, but they basically would build the barracks off in a site that was in a good area for work projects, and then they would try to find the kids who could work these camps over a period of usually 6 months was the term. And what's interesting is the people who worked at the CCC camps were basically kids who were either not in school, out of work, and with no sense of being able to find a job anywhere, because this was really the heart of the Depression,
right? And
things were not going well.
Well, that was the reason Roosevelt started the program. It was to provide jobs for the unemployed, especially the young men. And the camps up here in northern New England, most of those people, the young men that came, were actually from Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut. Generally,
that was the way it worked.
Well, the young men up here could always work on farms. A lot of them grew up on farms where they needed help.
Right.
But
the interesting thing is that you might think that the Dartmouth people would be involved in something like this, and they were employed, they were at school, and so really they were not. These were kids who came from city backgrounds or places to the south, and a lot of times people forget that the families were very large in those days.
Right.
And it was not uncommon for people to have 5 or 6 or more kids, and the amount of food that was available during the Depression, when there was no welfare support for people, was limited. And what was interesting is they actually had to spend several weeks as the kids turned up at the camps getting them fattened up,
right,
getting them back in shape, because some of them were quite underweight and not in the best of health. Mm-hmm. And of course, after a month or so of being fed every day and given exercise and doing different projects, a lot of them built up very nicely. And the goal was that they would also develop some useful skills.
And many of them did.
Many of them did. They had
learned some trades,
different subjects, and they would go off and get a job later, and that would be great. And of course, when World War II came along, a lot of the CCC members were able to move right into the military because they had had some exposure to military-like discipline.
You know, one of the things that I found was what I think was most important about that, other than providing with a job and 3 squares and so forth, was the fact that they were all given a salary, but they only were able to keep a very small percentage of it. Most of it had to be sent back to the families back home. So
I think the pay was $1 a day. So that works out to be $30 a month. And I think they were allowed to keep $5.
Something like that,
themselves.
Yeah. The rest was to go back to help the family back home, the siblings and the parents.
And that money was necessary and used. It was very helpful for families who had no other income.
Right.
Because it was not unusual for the men down at home to be unemployed.
Right.
You know, the work was very limited.
In the minute I have left, I'd like to mention that the CCC, they were also to do projects wherever they were, public projects. They built roads, they built trails, they did lots of things for the public good. And even today, we can see the results of that. Over in Stowe, the original ski trails were built by the CCC. And you could go on forever about each of these camps. But our time is up. Robert, I want to thank you very much for joining me tonight. I encourage you listeners to go to the library or wherever you can find these books. Many of these are in some of the bookstores in northern New Hampshire. Pick up any one of them. I think you'll find them very interesting. And with that, it's time for us to say goodnight.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
All right, and that was a conversation that Gary Moore had. Gary Moore had with Robert W. Averill, longtime Moosilauke historian. Now, coming up next, we're heading to Oliver Sugarhouse in West Groton for our sugaring report, where we talk with Troy Oliver about how the season is going and what it takes to make it all come together this time of year. It's coming up right after these important messages.
It's a St. Johnsbury Chrysler Dodge Jeep Rams Outdoor Edge on YKR Country.
At R&L Archery, we know it's not just about the thrill of the hunt or the size of the fish. It's about the moments that matter most, the traditions passed down from one generation to the next, and the stories told by the fire long after the sun is set. It's about the journey, the memories, and the time spent together with friends and family, because these are the moments that truly last a lifetime. R&L Archery, where every adventure begins. Come create your story.
So for our sugaring report, we're here on location in West Groton at Oliver Sugarhouse, and we're talking to Troy Oliver. Troy, how you doing?
Good.
So we're smack dab in the middle of sugaring season, would you say?
Yep.
Last show we actually had Mark Eiselhart from Proctor Maple Research Center on, and he was talking about how it's really hard to gauge how successful a sugaring season is, because it all depends on what your location is, where it's sunny and all that stuff. And you mentioned that you're up here in West Groton, that it's been pretty good so far.
Yeah, it's been real good up here.
Yeah.
We're about 50% right now.
Wow, okay. All right.
Last year we made 1,200 gallons and we're just over 600.
And so where do you see, how many taps do you have?
Just under 2,800.
Wow, okay. And talk a little bit about, for those that might not know about it, like the process behind your outfit. How does that work?
Well, they're all on pipeline that runs straight to the sugar house. And every year you got to put new spouts on your pipeline and to make sure everything's clean, no bacteria going in your trees. And then it all runs into the sugar house here. And then it goes through the RO and it comes out of the RO. And then it goes through 3x10 arch.
Right.
Through the filter press.
And so folks that might not know what RO is, what is it? What's
reverse osmosis?
Okay. It's not like how we were when we were growing up, Troy.
Oh, no, it's not.
And so what do you see, like, over the last few years, because you've been doing this for a while now?
Yeah.
How have you seen the technology change since you started doing this?
We were buckets. From being down at Robert Ferguson Sugar House, we were buckets down there 24 or 5 years ago, 1,200 buckets. And then just went up and up, and now it's all on pipeline and
right,
working good.
Granted, you have to wait for the sap to flow around this time of year, but this season you started working and making sure the pipes are all hooked up probably in the middle of the winter time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one guy that helps me a lot up in the woods, and he's been up there since just after hunting season.
I know we had an amazing snowmobile season, and the armchair meteorologist would say that if there's a really good snowmobile season, it means it's going to be a really good sugaring season because there's a lot of snowpack. Did you see any difference between this year and last year?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Really know what the answer is to it.
Yeah.
Just get lucky some years, and some years you don't.
Right. So you're still on pace, as you say you were from last year.
Yes.
So, yeah. And you said before I hit the record button that you're predicting that you're going to it's going to keep flowing probably another couple or so weeks, right?
Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks up here.
Right. Okay. And how does that compare to some of the other sugaring? Do you know?
The ones down lower usually end before we end.
Yeah.
And we usually go for another couple weeks after they do.
I mean, so, because Trey, you grew up in Groton. And so a lot of people think West Groton and Groton is the same town, but it's two separate towns.
It's 2 separate roads.
So what made you decide to have a sugar house in West Groton as compared to Groton?
A friend of mine had the land, so he let me tap them all.
Right.
So we built a sugar house on my son's land. So
Okay.
it works out good.
I do see sometimes people will have you bite a pickle with the maple syrup.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that just to like cleanse the palate and one thing?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really care for it. So.
I growing up, I never heard about like pickles and maple syrup, but that just seems to be like a big thing these days.
Yes.
Yeah. And so remind people too that might not know a lot about it is like the different grades of maple.
Yeah, so now, well, I don't know how many years ago it was, 5 or 6 years ago, they changed it all in Vermont.
Yeah.
So now it's all golden delicacy and amber rich and dark robust. It's all just darker syrup and
Right.
different flavor.
What's your preferred?
Fancy.
You like fancy?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I remember it used to be like grade B and grade A and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're here talking to Troy Oliver at the Oliver Sugarhouse up here in West Groton, and you got quite the setup here, Troy. You want to so paint the picture here for us? So we're in what part of the sugar house are we in right now?
We're standing in right where the sugar and arch is,
Okay.
and it's where the last of the boiling getting done, and then it's going over through and goes through the filter press. And then we have another room that goes directly into the canner.
Okay. All right. And so how many chords have you gone through so far?
Probably 7.
Wow. Okay. All right. So you usually go through 14 chords then?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you're like you said, you're pretty much halfway through. Yeah. And so if people want to come visit Oliver Sugarhouse, where do you guys have hours that they can visit, or?
We're here most every weekend boiling away, so anytime.
If you see steam coming out, they can come in.
Yep.
Yep. All right. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Troy. It's great talking to you.
Yep. Thank you.
Mark Breen. Welcome to the Outdoor Edge forecast. After the weather chaos of this past March, I'm sure April can't necessarily top it. Typically, April is the month that earns that reputation for sudden changes in the weather, and we will experience some of that over the next several days. Outdoor plans vary widely this month. A few die-hard downhillers get a few final, somewhat slushy runs in. Several episodes of mild air have reduced the snow below average for this time of year, so many winter sports are at their end. On the other hand, gardeners might get a little jump start on the season. Nothing like putting tomatoes in, but cleaning up some of the flower beds, and I know I just uncovered my garlic that's been slumbering beneath the snow through the winter. One of the temptations during the spring cleanup is to have a fire to burn things, but be very cautious. This is actually the season for our greatest fire danger. The strengthening April sun and low humidities in the afternoon can quickly dry out the dead grass and winter debris, and a seemingly minor, innocent fire can quickly get out of control. An overview of April shows a considerable warm-up through the month. Average highs start out in the 40s on the hills, near 50 in the valleys, warming to near 60 on the hills and 60s in the valleys by the end of the month. About 3/4 of the Aprils over the past century have had a spell with temperatures in the 70s. Nights still drop down below freezing, but on the average in April it's about half the nights. Rain is certainly more common than snow, although we do average 4 to 6 inches of snow in the valleys and near a foot on the hills, but those averages are made up of some very snowy Aprils alongside numerous Aprils that see only a dusting of snow here or there. We often get our first thunderstorm of the season. The current pattern shows a brief warm-up tomorrow into Saturday, giving way to colder weather for the first half of next week, then warming up again for the following weekend, trending cooler for the second half of the month. Rainfall looks uncertain, with only a hint on computers that there might be a little wetter conditions over the next couple of weeks and drier for the second two. We could use some rain to help replenish the dry conditions from last year. Now back to the forecast through the weekend. There are winter weather advisories late this evening into Friday morning. Periods of rain may be mixed with some sleet or freezing rain, especially over the higher terrain, lows close to 32. Friday, mostly cloudy, scattered morning showers, spotty in the afternoon, then breaks of sun and much milder. Temperatures climbing into the 60s. Friday night, periods of clouds, some breaks developing, lows in the 30s. Saturday, starting out the weekend with clouds, breaking for periods of sun, highs in the 50s. Saturday night, there's a chance of some rain showers, temperatures upper 30s and low 40s. And then Sunday, Easter, cloudy. Looks like periods of rain and showers for the Easter Bunny, temperatures 50 to 55. That's your Outdoor Edge forecast. I'm Fairbanks Museum meteorologist Mark Breen. Good luck and enjoy the great outdoors.
And that's going to do it for this week's St. Johnsbury Chrysler Dodge Jeep Rams Outdoor Edge. Big thanks to Gary Moore and our guest Robert W. Averill for sharing the history and stories behind Mount Moosilauke. It's always good to hear the deeper background on places many of us know and enjoy. And thanks as well to Troy Oliver at Oliver Sugarhouse in West Groton for giving us a look on how this year's maple season is shaping up, along with Mark Breen from the Fairbanks Museum for keeping us dialed in and on the weather. As always, As always, I'm getting my music queued up here. As always, thank you for listening, whether you're in the truck, out in the woods, or stopping by the Sugar House. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch this episode and all of our past episodes anytime at WYKR.com, on the WYKR app, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time on the Outdoor Edge. And this is WTWN AM 1100 Wells River, WW286DE 105.1 FM Haverhill, and WYKR 101.3 FM North Haverhill.
In preventing attacks carried